There's an extra chair at the dinner table. But no one lives here. I stared at the dining room table in my new home, confused by the inexplicable layout. The table was big enough to seat 12 people. I only had 4 chairs. And even one of those was a random extra that I'd found in the garage, covered in cobwebs and dust. I was unsure how many people had lived here before me, or if they'd had a large family, or maybe had liked to entertain. But it was clear that whoever had owned this house before me had not been expecting me. The realtor hadn't mentioned any of this when she'd shown me around. Then again, she hadn't mentioned much of anything at all. All she'd done was stand at the front door and say, "Here's the key. You're welcome to look around." Then she'd left, leaving me alone in the unsettling quiet of the old house. The whole place felt cold, like it hadn't been occupied in years. The windows were dusty, the paint was chipping, and cobwebs hung from every corner. And while most rooms seemed to have at least some furniture, the dining room was bare, except for the table and 6 chairs. It didn't take long for me to get rid of the extra chairs, although I kept one so I could eat in the dining room. At first, eating alone felt weird, but I got used to it. It was kind of nice having the whole space to myself. That was, until a few days later. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the backyard pulling weeds when I heard footsteps inside the house. Startled, I dropped the trowel and ran around to the front to see who was there. No one was on the porch or on the lawn, but I could hear someone walking around inside. I tried calling out hello, but no one answered. Confused and a little scared, I went back to the yard and continued weeding, assuming that I must have imagined the sound. Then a few days later, it happened again. I was baking cookies and listening to music when I heard what sounded like pots and pans clattering in the kitchen. Again, I called out, but there was no answer. At that point, I was worried enough that I called the police. They came quickly, 2 officers in all, and they searched the house and even brought in a canine, but no one was there. "It looks like a case of squirrels in the attic," one of the officers said with a shrug. And they left, but I didn't believe him. I'd seen no signs of squirrels, and I've never heard them making so much noise. Also, whoever or whatever was in the house seemed to be moving things around. Things that I didn't move, like that one chair that I'd put in the corner. One day I was working from home and sitting at my desk in the bedroom, which is also where the stairs are located. I heard someone walk up the stairs. This time, though, I was prepared. I sat very still, listening intently. Footsteps came closer. Then I heard a loud thump, as if someone had dropped something. Then silence. I held my breath and started counting. 1 minute passed, then 2. Still no sound. Then I heard a thump again, followed by footsteps coming back down the stairs. I ran to the top of the stairs, but all I saw was a rocking chair swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. Chill went down my spine. I knew I wasn't alone in the house. I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind. After all, the house was old, and the stairs are made of wood. Maybe the floorboards creaked when the wind hit just right, and maybe the rocking chair really did rock by itself. But my intuition told me otherwise. Whoever or whatever was in the house wanted me to know they were there. I knew I should call the police again, but I was hoping to catch whoever was in the house off guard, so I waited. I waited all afternoon, then all evening. Nothing happened. So I went to bed hoping to try again tomorrow. But when I woke up, I noticed that the chair was no longer on the landing. It was back in the dining room, facing away from me, as if waiting for me to arrive. That's when I knew that whoever or whatever was in the house wasn't just messing with me. They wanted me to move the chair, and so I did. I carried the chair out of the dining room and into the living room and placed it next to the couch. But the next morning, it was back again, this time pushed up against the wall. Whoever was moving the chair was getting bolder, so I decided to confront them. I armed myself with a baseball bat that I found in the garage and walked slowly up the stairs. No sound, but I could feel eyes boring into my back. Then I heard a loud crash. I whirled around to see an overturned stool on the top of the stairs. Heart pounding, I crept toward the sound. As I reached the foot of the stairs, I heard a voice. It was raspy and weak. "Who are you?" I asked, gripping the bat tightly. "Who's there?" The voice didn't answer, but I could hear sniffling. Cautiously, I continued climbing the stairs. And when I rounded the corner, I saw a rocking chair in the dim light of the upstairs hall. It was rocking slightly back and forth, but there was no one in it. Just as I was about to call out again, I noticed a small figure huddled on the floor in the corner. I dropped to my knees beside her and asked, "Are you okay?" She looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Who are you?" I asked again. She shook her head, then pointed to herself. "I'm Lily." My heart melted at the sight of the little girl in the tattered nightgown. She looked no older than 6, but I couldn't tell because her face was covered in dirt and her hair was matted. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "A long time," she whispered. "You don't want to stay here. It's not safe." Startled, I stood up and brushed dirt off my jeans. "What do you mean, who's not safe?" I scanned the empty hallway, but saw no one. Lily crawled back into her corner, wrapping her arms around her knees. "He's here," she whispered, "and he doesn't like it when visitors stay too long." Confused, I walked over to the rocking chair. As I did, the chair rocked back and forth a little faster. "Who's he?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. Lily didn't answer, but I could hear chains dragging metal moans. Suddenly, a heavy sound like a large body hitting the floor made me jump. I ran to the nearest room, which was an old nursery, and peeked under the crib. There was no one there. I checked the closet, but it was just filled with old clothes and toys. Back in the hallway, I found more rocking. I moved closer and saw the rocking chair moving violently back and forth. It scraped against the floor, making awful screeching sounds. And now I could hear a man's voice. It was deep and raspy, like gravel grinding together. "Leave now while you can. Don't come back. Never come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Lily's hand and we ran out of the house. Once outside, I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I locked myself inside and waited for my heart to slow down. Then I turned to Lily and asked, "Where are your parents?" "They're gone," she whispered, looking down at her feet. "He took them." "Who took them?" I asked. But she wouldn't look at me. She just shook her head again and whispered, "He took them." I stayed with her until the police arrived. When they asked her questions, she only shook her head, still refusing to speak. I felt terrible for the little girl, whoever she was, and however she ended up in my house. I also couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her parents. As I watched the police lead her away, I hoped that they'd be able to figure it all out, but they never did. Turns out that the house had belonged to a family of 4. One day, the father, mother, and son disappeared without a trace. Lily, who was adopted, somehow escaped, but she had no memory of her birth name or parents. The authorities were never able to find out what happened to the rest of the family, but they suspected foul play. As for me, I never saw or heard from Lily again, and though I sold the house as fast as I could, I often wonder about her and hope that she's doing well wherever she is.